Good afternoon. My name is Andy Lyon. I'm a Public Information Officer with Great Basin Incident Management Team 3, and we are coming to you live from Fairfield, the Fairfield Senior Center in central Idaho, to talk to you about the Ross Fork fire. The fire is sitting at 37,731 acres. Hasn't grown much, thankfully, in the last few days. We've gotten some rain, slowed things down, gotten the smoke out of the air. We're at 19% contained, but that number is going to go up this evening. I can't tell you exactly how much, but we're in the process of updating that right now, and a new number will be up on our NCWeb site in a matter of within the next hour or so. We're sitting at about 700 people. We've got two people to speak to you directly this evening, our Incident Commander Marty Adell and the Fairfield District Ranger Marty Gmelin. So we'll be taking your questions in person here at the Senior Center. We've got a small crowd, so we should be able to get everybody's questions answered, and we'll be also taking questions online. Some of those questions we're going to try and answer as they happen. We have information officers back at our incident command post about 15 miles south of Stanley online to try and answer some of those. Now, the connectivity there is not always great. We are in the middle of a field in central Idaho. So if we don't get to all of your questions, that may be one of the reasons, but type them in anyway, and we'll try and answer them. If not during the meeting, then later on during the evening or even tomorrow. So let's start with a update on what's going on around the fire with our Incident Commander, Marty Adell.
Good evening. Once again, my name is Marty Adell, and I'll give you an update of what's been happening today and the past couple days on the fire. I'll start in a clockwise manner, starting in Division Charlie, or in the northwest corner, and then rotate around because I'm pretty sure the biggest interest area is probably right about here, I'm assuming. So into the northwest corner, we've had very little movement in the past couple days. Obviously, the rain has slowed any kind of forward progress down. Sitting up there, currently we consider this unstaffed. We are monitoring it by air when we do have the availability for flight time, but just kind of watching it right there. As it comes down, though, into the Alturas Creek drainage, that's where we are starting to look and do a few different operations. We have had some hotshot superintendents come up here, check this area on this northern corner, really looking at what can be done. I am not telling anybody here news to say that stuff is very steep, very ragged, and the amount of beetle kill up in those drainages is tremendous. And that is a very large concern of ours, putting a mass amount of people into semi or completely charred standing lodgepole pine. That stuff is coming down continually without wind, and you put some wind in there, then it's really a grave issue that we're hoping not to have to deal with. So we been keeping this in check, watching and monitoring it. Coming down a little closer to Alturas, this fire, as it came up and over the ridge just to the south of Alturas Lake, we were able to put some of this in check, keep it from really ripping across, but really Mother Nature and the winds that were predominantly at that time out of the southwest and west were pushing it in the opposite way it wanted to go, which really was a nice aspect of this fire, where it backed down, burned a lot of that snags and the brush and the dead and down on the landscape, and it was a low intensity fire, obviously burnt right to the lake's edge, and we stopped it right there. Continuing on, we've had multiple hotshot crews, multiple Type 2 crews, engine crews, hit this area along that road, trying to thin out as much as we could and keep it from crossing that, which we have stopped it there. And then you'll see, if you come up here and look a little in a moment, or after this is over, on the northern edge, we are able to use hand line and dozer line to peel it off the road and kind of come up and around, bump it back into Highway 75, and keep it in check that way. Continuing south along the eastern area, once again you can see we had a contingency plan if it did push us really hard towards 70. We had resources along Highway 70, and as you all know, that the Highway 70 was closed down from time to time. But we're contingency plan to fire that off if need be off those series of roads. That was not the case. It slowed down enough where we could put dozers and hand crews in there, and then kept it at check that way, clean that up and stop the progress. Basically, where it was burning through the lodge pole, as soon as it got out into the open where there was considerable less woody debris and more of a sage lower component of fuel, we were able to keep it in check there and stop progress as we come around into this a little bit further south into that Smiley Creek, Beaver Creek area with the tremendous amount of roads in that area. We were able to keep it in check. We did have, as everyone knows, a very strong push several days ago as the Type 3 or Type 2 team came in, pushing to the northeast. We did have 2 structures in that area, very close to that area, that were consumed, as well as one up Little Beaver Creek. You can see this line in black, which I'll talk about as we get back up and around, but able to keep it in check there. We did have one spot that jumped up and over the Highway 75 road. Juan, do you need to be there? You're standing in the middle of everybody. Thank you. We did have a spot that did cross Highway 75, and we're able to keep that in check once again with hand crews, dozers, and the use of the roads, and we kept that at 800 acres. Jump back over, cross back 75, same type of deal with a little bit of dozer work, mostly hand crews, some engine work in there as well, and tying it into some dirt roads that were in that area. And then along the eastern flank here, along the Salmon River, same scenario. Hand line and dozer line would keep it in check with the aiding of it coming out of the lodge pole and the heavy stands of timber. Once it got into the sage, we were able to jump on it with the few resources we had at that time. Continuing up the Salmon River to the south, as once again heavy coming off this ridge and down low, we were able to put crews in there and protect it as it backed down that hill, got it into the sage, and we're able to backfire a little bit to keep it from crossing. 2 nights ago we had a significant push out of the west, as everyone probably remembers. We did have significant fallout of hot embers across the river. I think we picked up a little more than 24 hot spots across there. But the past several days we've been taking crews and gridding through there. We feel that is secure. We've picked them all up and extinguished them, but continued to move in a southerly direction back across the Salmon River to keep this in check as that fire was progressing naturally up that ridge. Also with that wind from a couple days ago, this was kicking off pretty good in this area here, which started a spot fire just ahead of where we were going in the salmon drainage. That's been sitting there for a couple days now. We hit it pretty hard with the Type 1 helicopters, the Blackhawks and the Sikorskis and such, and then also with some individuals. We had some hotshot soups checking this country out to see what would be the most optimal way to get in there and kind of suppress that. But once again, we're running into the same situation, incredibly steep, heavily wooded, and just a lot of dead standing timber, which really precludes us from putting a lot of folks in there. As we come down and around, we can see right here the fire has progressed a little bit to the south over the past couple weeks. We've had a little bit of activity in there. This area currently from the southeastern edge across all the way to south is currently unstaffed as of yesterday. A little bit of activity right here, a little bit in Vienna Creek in the past 3 days, but that has moderated, and very little movement at all in here. This area right just outside of the north or top of Ross North Fork of Ross Fork has had a little bit, but we're very secure in the fact that if it does go anyway with topography and the way that wants to burn naturally, it's just going to, if anything, it's just going to burn right into the back of that at a slow pace. And then as we wrap up and around this area, once again, due to steepness and where it's been sitting for almost our entire stay, except for a little bit of burning up along this edge, is in a monitor status, either by helicopters when working in that area or a fixed wing air attack. We start seeing some issues, we will respond to that. But two topics that I want to talk about. The black line you see, everybody wonders what containment line is. So as Andy was discussing, as of right now, we've got 19% containment. How much? 26. Jumped up to 26. Great. Anytime we have black in the percentage of containment means we feel that that piece of ground has been worked enough or naturally out enough that we can walk away from it and not worry about it. We've got other higher priorities on the fire. So as you can see, it's along the lake. That's pretty secure. The stuff along the highway, and then we bounced out. We put line in there. We had individuals, crews, and engines mop that up, almost 200 feet in, secure that area, and knock down a lot of the snags where we were working in there. From the additional containment line, I am assuming that a lot of this that you see in my slide my hand along the northeast corner and along this eastern edge into the Salmon River is contained and will be black. I think there's one little area right in here where there's still a very large amount of heat in there, and we want to get back in there for the next day or two to make sure we're secure. That is a priority, obviously, because of the individuals that live and the residents that live in that area. We're putting a lot of resources in there and trying to contain that line or put that line into containment so we can walk away and feel safe that we're not going to have anything else in there. I've already been asked, to discuss this area specifically, for obvious reasons, and the question of what do you have in there for resources? Why aren't there more resources? Why aren't there resources in there? If we go back from the time when the team started it a little more than a week ago, we have seen very little growth in here. We've already had two fire modules in here of 10 people each, plus miscellaneous folks, putting check line, hand line in there, and we feel incredibly confident that this is going nowhere. Speaking with the landowner that has the mining rights up here and looking at this specifically, we have had only just a little bit of fire, actual movement in the past several days. Tie that in with the predominant winds. As most people know that any fires in this neck of the woods, central Idaho, fires always want to go to the northeast because we get predominantly a west or a southwest wind that want to push them. Looking at our weather forecast for the next week, we are looking at west winds predominantly and with a day or two a southwest component. So we feel that the resources that we had down there, we could use over here to lock this down much more in a timely manner. And then if we need to, bring them back around. A couple other things we started looking at the fuel density, the fuel loading throughout that area and other natural breaks. And we feel very confident that if we do have any more fire growth, it is going to be very slow and minimal. Do we believe that it's going to be completely out? No. We're not pretending to think that this thing is completely taken care of. We're monitoring it, making sure that we have a plan. So if anything along that area starts really kicking up, we will evaluate and do what is necessary. If we have the ability, we'll put people up there. If we feel the need, we'll put people up there. But right now, the way that is and the distance it would have to travel against where, physically it would want to go, we feel very confident right now. But we are not just walking away from it either. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy. Back to Andy. I'll answer any questions after the presentation.
I just wanted to mention that we also have a fire staff officer from the Sawtooth National Forest and the forest supervisor. Thank you both for making the drive over, and they'll be available to answer questions that you in the room have or those of you online have. So, and now we'll hear from your local district ranger, Marty Gmelin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marty Gmelin, the district ranger here, and I'm not going to try to read off my notes. I just want to make sure I I do capture the high points, so just make sure I don't screw some stuff up. Anyway, can I give you a little brief history of the first couple of days of this, a couple of weeks of this, of what happened, and kind of our plans. So it did start kind of out here on the 12th of August. We got a call in from a hunter that was out there, said, hey, I see a smoke. And so we sent a helicopter up to go look for it. And due to a small and really wasn't putting that much smoke out, it really wasn't found until 2 days later on the 12th. We put hot smoke jumpers on it. When they landed on it, it was about 20 to 25 acres up on the top of a really steep slope here, basically Ross Fork and the North Fork confluence, kind of where it bends. By the next day, it was up to 160 acres, so it was really off to the races. They did try to put some line in there. It did held, but trying to get around to the rest of it. It was, by that time now, it was kind of over the hill into Gold Run Creek, the upper Gold Run Creek drainage here, predominantly burning in the timber. The grass and the sage was not burning, so it was basically working down the Gold Run drainage, kind of about 10, 15 acres a day, but the way the smoke was, they just really couldn't see it. So really he's been talking about before, you know, the snags, the steep slopes, it's all there too. So really our number one concern is firefighter safety. How are we going to get people in and out? It's a long drive, as you probably all know, to get from Bear Creek Transfer out to here, let alone when we were putting people on quads from Bear Creek Transfer up to the bottom of Gold Run. It's about another hour quad ride to get into there. So long travel times. So the hot shot crews were there for a couple of days. We brought another crew in. We actually brought 2 crews in. So this thing has never been unstaffed. And they worked on the opportunities to figure out where the best place to use natural features and some line to cut this thing off. And their best guess was, or their best shot was, and it worked, was basically right where it comes out of Gold Run Creek down into the Ross Fork Creek area. So you got a lot of rock on both sides, and they were able to tie some line in between both sides of that. So really our number one concern this was always down here. We call them values at risk. So what we did is we had management action points. If it crossed Ross Fork, we were going to try to think about doing more heavily suppression activities. But it was really try to suppress here and then contain around the rest of it when it was still going here. So not many values this way at the time. A lot of values down this way. So we identified that from the beginning of where we would try to attack this thing if we had to, when we had to. And it never did come out. It never did come that way. So that was a great thing. So that work they did is good. Yes, there's nobody up there now, but we still have pumps in place. We still have hose in place. They did cut a line from basically Johnson Creek confluence kind of up to Gold Run to be able to kind of catch it that way, see if it came out. So really, truly that way, it has been going pretty good. A little more notes I can check real quick. So, you know, factors involved when we made the decisions to confine here, suppress here, and the rest of it was firefighter safety. You know, we want to make the ground evacuation times. It really comes down to putting the firefighters in the right place at the right time with the right equipment. So really just thinking this thing out. We used different models to figure out what the fire progression was going to be, how it all modeled out, and it wasn't going to come this way towards the models that bad, but we just made sure that we put all our effort into there originally. That's really some of the high points of those first couple days. One of the things I was asked about too was fire safe, making your homes fire safe, your cabins fire safe. So really there's Firewise communities. I have a couple pamphlets over here. Really the basic principles there are between 0 and 5 feet of your structure. It should be non-combustible, so kind of remove as much of the combustible material as possible. The next 5 to 30 feet, you can still have trees and combustible stuff, but kind of have them staggered, kind of like you're all sitting around the room. So that way, it's not going to hop from tree to tree or shrub to shrub or whatever. That has a chance to be able to protect that. And lastly, from about 30 to 100 feet, same thing. Kind of limb up your trees, have a little bit, could be more vegetation out there. Really, the object is if the fire's coming at your house, it's going to lessen its intensity. Also, it gives the firefighters a chance to be able to fight the fire. So not having wood on your deck during the summer, In the winter when getting ready to get a lock down, snowmobile in there, sure, no problem. But in the summers, take it away. Other things, make sure your property's properly marked with some numbers, if it's possible. Have your driveway, so if we can get a truck or some crews in there, in and out, so that way they have more space. Well, hello. Welcome. Anyway, screens, clean your gutters in the spring and the summer, because we have all our pine needles going on that. Clean the roof of your eaves. Just, wow, this place has gone to the dogs. Anyway, those kinds of things. So there's a lot of different fire safe principles out there. So you can kind of take some pamphlets and go from there. That's kind of all I've got right now, and we'll open it up for some questions.
For those of you online, we had a couple dogs. We have the back door open, and a couple dogs walked in.
Hey guys, hold on.
Yeah. Come on. We have a small child, so we're kind of watching the dogs. All right. Do we have any questions in the room, folks? We got all kinds of people. Yes, sir. I'll hold the microphone for you.
How much time lapse was there before you started fighting this Ross Fork fire? Was there like a day, or what was it? How many hours, or was it a day before you started?
So it was by the time we got the initial, by the time we started, by the time we could finally find it, was 2 days. But we weren't ready to, couldn't find it, you're not going to fight it. So really it was a matter of hours before we got the smoke reported, and we had the smoke jumpers on the fire. So it takes them a while to be able to, get in onto the fire, but really right off the get-go, as fast as we could get anybody out there.
I'd like to if I could. Yeah, I've got an idea that I've had for a quick response on forest fires, and I wanted to bring it out and tell people about my idea, and that is to put people back on the lookouts like we used to have people in all the lookout stations, and then put a tanker helicopter every 120 miles, pick out place like Idaho Falls, maybe Haley, maybe Boise, figure it out, Salmon, McCall maybe. Okay, have these helicopters, tanker helicopters, loaded with retardant, ready to go 24/7 during fire season. The first sign of smoke, have the closest helicopter in the air and going, and the furthest any of them would have to go would be 60 miles. And they could be there in around 20-25 minutes. They could be there. And put a load of retardant immediately on that fire. If you can get to those fires that quick, you can get 75% of them out.
Well, let me see if anybody wants to.
And that kind of ties in with the question I have.
Okay.
Okay. This may be back and forth a little bit, but to try to quantify what he's talking about is first you have to go back to Forest Service policy. Forest Service policy for this district, this area, is not to put the fire out. It's to manage the fire and move it and play with it and direct it into different areas. But when they found the fire, it would be against policy to put that fire out, from what I read. And it says the managers will play with the fire, direct it, and so on and so forth, which brings me to my complaint, because I've discussed this over many years and decades. What we have is this.
Do you have a question? Because there's a lot. All right.
White bark pine. This burned through a number of ridges with white bark pine. The taxpayers are paying millions of dollars to preserve white bark pine. Forest Service, on the other hand, is paying is burning them out. You can't have both, So these fire managers.
Let's
talk about that.
There's a lot between the two of you gentlemen there. And I'm not sure who wants to start where.
I'll start with the lookout one. Okay. Because I do have an answer on the lookout one. So yes, we're working with our Washington office to actually, not a person in there, but we'll have a camera up there on a trial basis that will be able to control. Well, someone will be able to control. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it here at the district. That will be able to look around the woods and do it that way. And that's that's kind of a thing offshoot out of the University of Nevada, Reno. That if you look into California, that all PG&E and all these different towers have cameras up there for live spotting. So while we may not have people in the tower, we will be able to use that tower to look into that backcountry.
As far as the helicopters, okay, so let's say you kicked out some really great places. McCall, Boise, Idaho Falls, Haley, Mountain Home. All those places do have fast response, either air attack, or excuse me, not air attack, either retardant ships, either seats or heavy air tankers or helicopters. So for instance, Boise. Boise has the heavy air tanker base that's right in Boise. We have a seat base, the BLM, in Mountain Home. Twin Falls has a heavy air tanker base or seat base, also with a helicopter with a module. Sawtooth has one up in Haley. They have a helicopter there. Obviously, the smoke jumpers, as you were saying, there's a base in Boise and a base in McCall. You start going out a little bit further to the east. Idaho Falls has resources. Pocatello has a seat base, or excuse me, a heavy air tanker base right there. There are resources. I promise you that. There is a little glitch as far as keeping them fully full, if you will, 24 hours a day. The problem with retardant is if it's not continually churned up, it will start to coagulate and gum everything up. So that's why the heavy air tankers and seats are sitting on the tarmac empty when they get a call. That's when the crews come in, fill them up, because if they have it in their tank any more than 3 to 4 hours, it will start coagulating, and then you start gumming up either the door baffle system that releases it, or just it'll get so solid that it'll turn to jelly, actually. So
they can figure out a way to circulate.
It's a great, yeah, they do, they have. It's in the tank that's on the ground. The problem with any type of adding a pump, a filtration system, a circulation system, that's adding weight to the plane, which then in turn reduces the amount of retardant that we can carry in those aircraft. So, but there are resources there. We do not have the ability to fly at night. We don't have our air tanker pilots, our helicopter pilots, our flight crews that have NVG or night vision goggles. We don't use that. Between the clouds, the mountains, and the smoke that they deal with, it's just it's more problems and already throwing into, and everybody knows flying in the mountains is already a little bit treacherous at night. So we don't have that option at this time. But it's a great point. I see where you're going. I like the fact that you're thinking strategically where to put stuff to get it out there quicker. And it's a great point. We continually try to hone that to make sure our resources are as quick response as possible. For instance, the air tankers, the helicopter crews, and smoke jumpers, they are on a quick release. They get the call and they are off the ground. I was a smoke jumper for 22 years. We were off the ground in 6 minutes. We got the call, we're gone. Helicopters, they're the same way. And I know the seats in the air tankers have a very strict way. You got to do your quick checks, but if they get a call, they are off the ground within 30 minutes at a long end. And that's usually at the bigger airports where there's more aircraft traffic. So, but a great point.
So we had a question about white bark pine and how we're handling that.
That is not something, that's Forest Service.
It's identified as a value that we're concerned about on the fire, and we'll let.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Pratt, for the question. And there was a two-part question. The first part was the forest plan, which allows fire to play its natural role. That is true. This forest does have that in their forest plan. It was scoped through the public, I think, in about 2003, and was accepted by the public as a option for us in management. However, on this fire, that we didn't not suppress this fire for that purpose. We did not suppress this fire right here for firefighter safety. We did recognize, however, that there were some beneficial elements from our forest plan that would benefit from fire, but that's not why we manage this fire the way we have. As far as the white bark pine, you're right, exactly, and it's about to be, I understand, about to be listed as an endangered species. And so we're very concerned about white bark pine as well. We do know that it's a fire-adapted timber type, and so many of those trees are setting up on very exposed rocky ridges in open country, and I'm quite certain a lot of those did not burn. Of course, many of them did, especially the ones that were grown around with subalpine fir in the area. And that's what happens with the lack of fire, actually, is the subalpine fir comes in, chokes the white bark pine, and then when the fire does come, that white bark pine does burn. So great question, and we are very concerned about the white bark pine as well. And I'm sure we're going to be looking at what kind of mortality we got from that. Thanks.
All right, so we had a question online, Marty Adell, about resources and what kind of resources. We are in kind of starting to downsize now, and the question was what kind of resources specifically are going to be left in Division E up here, the Alturas Lake, Cabin Creek, Pettit Lake area of the fire.
Right now, we've got multiple hotshot crews, multiple Type 2 crews. Some, basically, we type all of our crews with experience and capabilities and qualifications. Then we have all types of engines, Type 6, the smaller ones that look like just a regular pickup truck with a slip-on in the back, up to the large six-wheeled cab and a half, so they can have four to six people in them as well. We're going to keep a tremendous amount of work individuals in here for the next several days. The crews will continue to, even though this turns black, we still have a fair amount of work to do in this area right now, just because of trying to preemptively have that work done. So if, for instance, in 4 days, 5 days, our weather predictions are very solid out to about 4 days, and we're looking at getting rain. After that, it starts, we'll see what happens. As all know, in Idaho in September, you're going to wake up with 14-degree temperatures and then be 85 by mid-afternoon. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to do up in these areas, fuel breaks, thinning, and then disperse of that thin material to get out to reduce any kind of fire progression across the way. So,
all right, do we have other questions in the room? And again, we'll stand by afterwards. Hearing none others, and we don't. Oh, yes, sir.
So I got a question. You say you can have the helicopters and stuff within 6 minutes. So after his comment about that wasn't your guys' plan for the fire, basically there should have been no houses or structures lost, because it sounds like to me a fire could have been put out extremely fast. Smoke jumpers, and you have access to helicopters, planes, whatever. So my question is, what was your plan? Why you didn't put it out? And then what goes on with the structures that were lost because of, I don't know, negligence might be a big word, but with you just up there saying that the helicopter availability and stuff, and the hot shots getting in there.
All right, let me try and paraphrase your question for the benefit of our online audience. We got, I don't know, 80 or 90 people watching online. So the question, as I understand it, is if we have all these resources, why didn't it get out before it got to the point where it was taking out homes? Okay. I think Marty kind of addressed the early days and what we did or did not. So
I can certainly start off, and then I'll get to the later question. I can pass this off to Matt if he'd like to talk about it. Great question. As far as where I was going with the amount of resources or where we have them stationed and their ability to take off quickly. It's a great point. The issue we're running into is we have these resources throughout Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Colorado, everywhere, right? Problem is, it's an infinite amount or a finite amount. We only have so many. So when we start getting fires like the Moose Creek fire, that's very large and pulling in a lot of resources because it's moving towards high value resources up there into town. We've got the Four Corners fire at the same time, just west of Cascade Reservoir. We had multiple fires throughout the area, and also you got to look into, I work for the BLM, we had multiple fires on the range as well throughout southern Idaho. Then you get into play Oregon, Washington, California at the same time when all that stuff is starting to really kick off. We did have a slower than usual fire season, except for the Southwest and Alaska, but through June, July, it was relatively slow throughout. But all of a sudden, mid-August, that's when we really kicked in. Everybody probably realizes how we had a dry winter, and then all of a sudden April started raining, and it didn't stop raining until June. It then shut off, and just the whole West started baking again. What that really aided in that springtime rain, for anybody that's on the range, recognizes that spring rain really started growing up a lot of grass, and it really kicked into the shrubs and stuff like that. So we were going to have a later fire starts than usual, kicked off, and we had just a tremendous amount of fires nationally. They had resources on the ground. They moved in, and then once, as Marty was describing, they got there. It was 20 acres. Very shortly there, 100 acres, and then continued to grow. I don't believe that it was lack of work. They were trying. I believe it was a lack of resources. Even when the Type 3 or Type 2 team came in, when our team came in, we only had 2 crews and a couple engines. Since that point, we are able to quell some other fires in the area. For one, the Four Corners one, just outside of Cascade, we were able to absorb some of those resources and built up, and then we had a stronger force to really start hitting back on the fire growth, and as it slowed, really jump on it. So I hope that answered part of your question as far as that.
Okay, sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. My name is Matt Filbert. I'm the fire staff officer here on the Sawtooth. So thanks for the question, and it's important to clarify. When we initially discovered this fire and had the 7 smoke jumpers jump that, they worked it hard for, I believe, 2.5 days right here, down here in the back end here. One of the smoke jumpers, upon landing, twisted his ankle. We had to get him off the hill and figure out how to get him off the hill. And this is about a 5 to 6 hour evacuation time from up here, just up here on the actual fire itself. So as the fire continued to grow, we recognized the exposure as we had time to look at in detail at what kind of exposure we were putting these kids into. We stood back and we said, wait a minute, that's not a smart way to fight fire. We're going to get someone hurt. So we stepped back into the Ross Fork where we had a good UTV trail and a good plan to keep this anchored from moving south. So we had single engine air tankers, smoke jumpers, and a helicopter on this fire nonstop for about 2 days. And then before the smoke jumpers pulled off, because we didn't want them up in that dangerous country, we had a wildland fire module come in. And their specialty is really to work in remote country. Logistically, they support themselves. So we put them in down here where it was much safer to address the fire. As the fire moved across here, we kept it in check, kept it from doing anything that we didn't want it to do, that we could do. The problem is if you don't have boots on the ground, water and retardant doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. All we do then is expose aviators to hazards because they are not putting the fire out. So as we continued to build our plan, we built more management action points basically saying, this Johnson Creek country is very steep and very rugged. We can't put people in there either. It's too dangerous. We're going to kill somebody. So we said, okay, when the fire gets to a certain point, we're going to order up a team and we're going to bring more resources in to try to manage it up in some of this high country where we identified some hellispots. and there were far fewer snags, more open country. Then Mother Nature dealt us the blow. Remember Labor Day? I don't ever remember Labor Day like that, and I've been here for 22 years. It was hot, it was dry, it was windy. The relative humidity never got above 20% at night. So you had multiple days of drying, and we just were unable to hold it down, to let this natural barrier do its job, even with folks up there to meet the fire at the edge. And one of those mornings, it had gotten over Beaver Creek, very well established, very steep, very snaggy country, and we had a Type 3 team ready to go, and they were engaging the fire as it met the values at risk down there in Smiley Creek. As far as responsibility goes, this is a lightning fire, and we have done everything we can early on with the Type 3 team that was here and with the Type 2 team to manage the fire, to minimize threat to values at risk and threat to firefighters. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We have a couple other questions online, and then we'll want to be respectful of your time and the time of the folks who drove down here so they can get back on the road and get back to fighting the fire and managing the fire. One of the questions, and I'm not sure who to address this to, is about private in-holdings. I know we have a number of them around the fire area, and whether permittees, I guess you call them, are able to thin their property and how that works. And a secondary question to that is what happens to the properties that we have already done some work as we leave? What does that look like as we pull out the pumps and hoses and?
So on private land, the Forest Service doesn't have any jurisdiction over it. So and I was talking about earlier about the fire wise and prepping your house for fire. So on private land, yes, do whatever you can for the fuel reduction, limbing, cutting, brushing, whatever, to deal with that. But it's also your responsibility to dispose of that waste. So you just can't cut some brush down and throw it over on the Forest Service side. You can't do that. If you have a rec residence, kind of like over in the Smoky Bar area, then you can work with the Forest Service, because you have a permit there, that we will work together to help clean that out between your houses and help you manage those houses as long as you ask, and you have to ask for that. One of the things we're going to do, last time it was done, is we're going to go over on the private land and we're going to assess those structures. So there's a lot more on that over on the North Fork of the Boise, and that strip of land in there. There's a lot more houses than there were over the last couple of years. So we're planning on next year and going in there and assessing that, and so that we have our notes of here's this house, here's what it looks like, is it defendable or not, and those kind of notes. So that way it'll go a long ways into the future for future planning. Did that answer the question? I think so. Okay. And
Marty, can you talk about what it looks like as we start to pull out all the sprinklers and hoses, and how do we leave the properties that we've been working so hard to protect when we leave?
So for the properties that we've thinned, especially along the roads, we try to get rid of the brush. In fact, on the northeast corner, we're trying to reduce all the limbs and the trees that we've taken out and thinned, and we're getting rid of that, chipping them. In areas that are very dispersed already, we might just lay them down and distribute them further, so it's not going to cause a cache. As far as the places where you see hose, pumps, sprinkler systems up on these structures or around the structures, we will leave them there as long as there is a threat. If, let's say, this weekend we get 6 inches of snow, we'll probably pull that stuff out of there before it snows. But if there's a threat, we will leave it there. If there's a threat, that means there will be a team like ours to make sure that we have plans for any type of that threat, and they will be monitoring that equipment throughout the threat till the very end. If we do leave and transition it back to the forest, they will have individuals that do that same thing.
Okay, we have one more question from the audience.
Were the fire first started down that little point, that little pink deal at the bottom, you said you didn't have enough resources to fight it. Why? Did I hear that incorrectly or what?
There were a lot of other fires going on at the time. I'll let an actual firefighter answer the question.
Thanks. As the fire grew, we did have resource constraints. We just couldn't get resources. Okay, yep. And back here, back here we were talking about firefighter risk, exposure, the threat of them actually getting killed doing the job of fighting fire. We did, yes. 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 However, as I said before, and maybe I skimmed over it, we're not going to apply water or retardant without folks on the ground to back that up and put the fire out, because retardant in water does not put the fire out. It can slow it down for a period of time, without a doubt, but it does not put the fire out. And we were unwilling to risk folks, firefighters, young men and women in there, to back that up and put that fire out. We just weren't going to do it. It's too dangerous up there.
So now we've got all that waste.
Right? And it is, and I feel for those folks for sure.
Concerned about the environment and all the smoke we've been breathing.
Right. Well, and we're very, very feeling for everyone who's dealt with this, and very much feel for everyone and feel for everything out here that's been damaged by the fire. And that really gets to me. It does. What gets to me more is putting someone in there that shouldn't be in there, that we can't get out, and something happens to them. I'd have a hard time with that. Thanks.
Hey, I want to thank everybody online. We'll be in the room. We can talk to you afterwards. There were some additional questions online, I know, about evacuation status, about whether the fire can continue to move towards Gmelin, or a couple other locations were asked about. And let me just answer that generally. The threat is not over. There's, as I mentioned when I was doing a test earlier, we saw a tree torching off in the distance at Sawtooth City as we were driving over. The fire's not out everywhere. It's slowed down. It's kind of quiet. It's not out. So there's, as a number of the speakers have said, things could dry out, and this fire, the threat is not over. So one of the things that we'll be doing is working with the forest to plan for what happens should this, come back to life at a future date. So let's look and let's hope for some good rain tomorrow, good rain through the next few days. That's going to make us all feel better about it. Pay attention to the Sawtooth National Forest Facebook page and your local emergency sheriffs and emergency management pages. We will let you know about changes in evacuation status just as soon as we make those decisions. So I want to thank everybody. Continue to ask your questions. We'll try to get them answered in the chat, in the comments, and we'll continue to bring you information in the days ahead. Thank you very much.